This week's guest is Rabbi Dr. Gil Perl. Rabbi Perl is the CEO of the Ades Family Foundation and the founding head of school of the Jewish Leadership Academy, which is a middle and high school opening in Miami in 2023. He is the former head of school at Kohelet Yeshiva in Philly and the Margolin Hebrew Academy in Memphis. He is the author of the book The Pillar of the Lashon, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, and the World of 19th Century Lithuanian Torah Scholarship. Rabbi Perl writes and lectures on topics including history of modern Jewry, contemporary Jewish education, and modern Orthodoxy. Rabbi Perl has a blog, gilperl.com, and you can find him on Twitter at the @GPerl. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your trip here to Teaneck, speaking over the weekend, over the couple of days. Really, thank you for taking the time to speak to education.
It is my pleasure to be here.
So first things first, what got you inspired to go into Jewish education in the first place?
You know, I often tell people that I'm an accidental educator.
Interesting. What does that mean?
I didn't take what I would consider to be the sort of normal or regular trajectory.
Okay.
Certainly not to school leadership, but I sort of fell into it. I found myself, already in high school, starting off in the camp world and finding myself teaching, informally.
Which camp world were you in?
So my vaunted high school basketball coach, the great Bobby Kaplan,
nice.
When I was in high school, started a camp called IBA, the Israel Basketball Academy.
Sure.
And so that's where I started as a counselor,
really?
And then
Nice.
as the program director. And then when the second Intifada
This
broke
is when
out,
it was in Israel, or
back when it was in
in
Israel.
Israel? Oh wow.
And then when the second Intifada broke out and families weren't sending their kids to Israel, we bought a campus. I became a partner with Bobby.
Oh, cool.
The campus we bought near Camp Masora.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I remember that. That's cool.
So through that whole trajectory of growth from a counselor to a program director to a partner in the camp, I constantly found myself teaching in one way or the other.
And during that time, while you were the partner in the camp, what were you doing during the year? You were working 24 like the whole year towards.
I was working on my doctorate then.
Okay.
Doctorate and later on smicha, but I was teaching like in Hebrew school on Sundays.
Oh, cool.
But I was a full-time student at the time,
Cool.
actually it was actually Rav Boaz Mori, who is the Rosh Yeshiva at Leva Torah.
Sure.
He was our camp rabbi.
Really?
And he was actually the first person who sat me down and said, Gil, you need to go into chinuch.
Really?
I'm like, what?
Wow.
He's
Many thousands of people have him to think. That's amazing. Wow.
Could be, but he was definitely the first one who said it's just what you're there to do. So
wow, that's so cool.
That's how it started.
And what's your goal as a Jewish educator? I know on your website it says that you're fascinated by the Jewish future. What does that mean? What's your goals there?
It's funny because education is all about the future, right? We're here to prepare kids for the world that they're headed to. That's what it means to educate, right? And yet, I think so often it doesn't actually work that way.
Yeah,
right.
I hear that.
And education is more about repeating kind of what I experienced, right?
Yeah.
Because I was educated, right, and now I do what was done to me, right, to others. And because I didn't take kind of this normal trajectory or traditional trajectory to school leadership, I became a head of school at the age of 29. I'd never taught a day of elementary school or high school.
Wow, that's
was a little different.
That's a little different. Stat right there.
Which is also why I encourage people to come at this from all angles, and those who are also on the hiring end to think a little more broadly about the people who can do these jobs. But there were certainly limitations, right? There were certain, there were obviously things that were working against me.
Sure.
Trying to run a school, having never actually taught in the classroom. We're trying, more precisely to lead a team of educators when you haven't been in their shoes.
Right.
Which is a challenge. But it also forced me to ask questions. Right, because I didn't know how Chumash is supposed to be taught.
Interesting.
I didn't know how.
Meaning asking questions from your educators who are
educators,
really?
Right?
That's so cool.
Why do we do it this way?
Right.
And what's the best way to do it?
Interesting.
And I think it's been that process of asking questions, which also led me to ask, well, what ought we to be doing if the goal is to prepare kids for that world in which they're headed? And I think that set of questions sort of got me fascinated with, well, where's the world headed? Right? Where's society headed? Where's the Jewish community headed? Right? And once we can, obviously we'll never know for sure, right? But once we've got our best guess, at where the world is headed and where our community is headed. Now our process is to reverse engineer that and say, okay, well, what do our children need to know
right,
and be able to do in order to best succeed in that world that they're headed to?
When you say prepare them for the future, in what way? Prepare what aspect?
All aspects,
Interesting.
right? So if that's in their general studies education, right? So then we need to recognize what pieces are being valued in the workplace today, right? And are we actually teaching those when they're young, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's, if we're heading to a place where critical thinking or the ability to synthesize massive amounts of information, right, is incredibly important in the world that our kids are headed to, where are we teaching them those skills, right, in school today? If we're talking about the religious side of things or the spiritual side of things, so we need to ask ourselves, right, what is the current state of Jewry, right? Where are we succeeding in our adult lives as Yirei Shamayim, as Gomlei Chasadim, as Lomdim, right? Whether it be in our own homes or outside of them, and then ask ourselves, well, what do our kids need, right, in order to be able to succeed in that reality? Because it is a changing reality, right? The role of a posek, of a rav, has changed dramatically, right? From the time where any shaila you had, right, went either to your own Svarim Shenk or it went to your local posek, till today it goes to Google, right? So are we actually equipping our kids, right, to adjust to that or to actually succeed in that type of world? Right.
It's so interesting because I've been thinking a lot about lately, education basically all the Jewish day schools are very similar. Obviously they all have their nuances, but for the most part they're very similar, and they're based on the way that our parents were taught and then their parents taught. And it's like, I wonder, are we doing what we should be doing? Maybe we need like a total reboot. Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel like you have that opportunity in your school that you're creating, and I know that you've been the head of school of different schools, and you've had an opportunity to really create amazing things happening there and different models, which we'll get to soon. So I guess before we get to that, what was it that got you to this position that you're in now? Was it a person? Was it someone? I mean, I know you mentioned before someone said to you have to be in chinuch. So was it that, or was it what got you here?
First and foremost, I truly believe Yad Hashem. I truly believe that.
Totally.
There's just too many different things that happen along the way, to not be able to recognize and attribute it to that. But the story goes something like this. I mean, I thought I was going to go into academia. I was, getting my graduate degree and really thought that was where that was headed. I'd come to YU to teach undergrads Jewish history.
One of my friends told me that they had you, and they said it was the best class ever.
I appreciate that.
Just giving you a little compliment there.
And so I was teaching undergrads, and at that point, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb became the head of school at MTA, and I knew Rabbi Gottlieb. He had been in Boston when we lived in Boston. Actually, I think he was even a sports counselor at Marashah when I was when I was a camper there.
That's fine.
So we knew each other, and he had just come to become the head of school at MTA, and he was looking for help on the administrative side. He was looking for a director of admissions. I had no experience as a director of admissions, but I had been running camps. So there were some similar skill sets there. Sure. And I think he also knew that being an adjunct professor at YU didn't exactly put food on the table.
Sure.
So he came to me and asked whether I would join his administration in addition to teaching undergrads at YU. And I said, okay. And he said he would send me for training and I would learn, I'd learn the ropes. And I became the director of admissions. Before I knew it, I had become the associate head of school.
Wow. And
then I get a call from Memphis, Tennessee, since we're looking for a head of school. And I said, that's nice, but, I'm here. I'm living in Bergenfield, literally down the street on this very same street that we live on. My wife was teaching and had a sort of a quasi-administrative position in Frisch. Like, we weren't looking for anything.
Right.
And they just kept calling. And eventually they said, if you come and visit, we'll stop calling. I said, that sounds like a decent proposition. I said to my wife, listen, here's how to get them to stop bothering us. I just have to go and visit. And she said, you can go. And if there's anything to talk about when afterwards, we'll discuss.
It's funny.
And so I did. and I was blown away by what I saw.
Really?
Again, having grown up here in Teaneck,
Sure.
I'd never, other than schooling, I'd never lived out of town,
Yeah.
right? I'd never really experienced that for myself. And I went and I was blown away by what was there and what I imagined could be there. And I came back and told my wife and said, listen, we just have to go for Shabbos together, right? And you just tell me what you see,
Sure.
because I know what I'm seeing, but you tell me what you see. And we had an amazing Shabbos down there. And that just got the ball rolling. We decided,
Wow.
we literally decided that if we had gone into chinuch in order to be mashpia, in order to make an impact, then eino dome. What we could do down there, even though we weren't both in great positions here. I was at MTA and YU, and she was at Frisch. But if it was about making an impact, then eino dome what we could do down there versus what we could do up here.
It's good for educators to hear. Go out of town, you can make a great impact, and also the idea that you said that you took a step. You didn't really want it necessarily. You took a step just to give it a try, and look what happened from there. That's incredible.
That's absolutely true.
And who were your role models over all these years in education?
I don't know that I can point to a role model in education. I've had the opportunity, thank God, to travel quite a bit and visit quite a number of different schools, largely non-Jewish schools, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. And I've seen a bunch of things that really took me. I have role models in life.
Who's your role models in life? Sure.
I think one of them you may have just recently spoken to, but Rabbi J.J. Schachter
has
has been a role model of mine for a very long time, since I cold called him when he was the rabbi at the Jewish Center on his way to Boston.
Cool.
And I had just gotten into, to my graduate program and wasn't sure if I should go there.
Yeah, he's amazing for that. He's great for giving advice on these. Yeah.
Unbelievable. And since then, thank God, we've had an amazingly close relationship. And, I've got to watch him teach, watch him inspire, watch him with his own family. And on every level, he's taught me a tremendous amount.
That's awesome. That's really special. So, you mentioned that at a certain point you went down to Memphis. How old were your kids at that time, going through that move?
So my oldest was in first grade.
Okay.
So I had one who was, I guess, 7, one who was 5, right? And one who was a baby at the time.
And then you moved after that to Philly, right?
7 years later.
7 years later. So how was it during parenting, during those moves? Because a move can be, it's a stressful time for adults, but it's also, it's emotionally challenging for children.
Yeah.
What was it like parenting through those moves?
So the move to Memphis, honestly, was really not challenging at all.
Right.
Our kids were young,
first graders,
they're right?
Yeah.
And it's important for parents to know. Sometimes we just project a lot of our own fears on them.
Sure.
And they really are extremely resilient. And I say that not only just looking at my own kids, but the number of families that I've dealt with on the receiving end who've moved into my communities over time. There really aren't many at all who have struggled with that transition when their kids are young. When we came to Philly, it was a different story. My kids were a little bit older. So, often it's important to sort of look for those natural transition points. But if you have multiple kids, we had 4 at the time, they can't all be at, sure. natural transition points. But my oldest was going into high school. So that made a lot of sense. And that is actually why we were looking at that point. We were happy in Memphis. Things were going great. But we knew that if we were going to make a move, this was the time to do it as my oldest was going into high school. So his transition actually was really excellent. But I had one who was going into 7th grade, right? And a daughter going to 7th grade, and that was very hard, no question about it.
So what did you do as parents to help her through that time, or help the rest of your children also through that time?
So first of all, I know that this podcast is both about education and parenting, and that actually made me a little hesitant because anything we have 4 amazing kids, and all the credit in the world for their upbringing and parenting goes to my wife, who, by the way, from the very outset has been a full-time school administrator and leader, also full-time, right? And
I'll have to get her on the podcast.
You really should get her on. You really should talk to her about parenting. And even here in this transition, I think she really created a space for my daughter to be herself, to express herself,
right.
It honestly, it was just a matter of time,
right.
and for us reminding ourselves that it's a matter of time,
right,
and she will get there. And her school was certainly good about it, But we struggled with. I'll tell you, one of the really interesting moments in that transition was she wanted to go back to Memphis to see her friends. She had a bunch of really good friends, right? And she did. We sent her back like for a Shabbos to go, and the truth of the matter is she came back from that, and it was already like, you know what? It's not so bad.
I moved on.
So
Like I'm okay.
Exactly. So that really was a key piece for her. But seventh grade. Moving a seventh grade daughter is just hard.
Yeah, that's hard.
But you should know it gets better.
Yeah, it's good. It's good advice. So once you got to Philly, you became the head of school of Kohelet, and then you started the lab school there. You had a very unique model in the lab school, which I'm very familiar with. But can you describe it a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as you said, when I came, Kohelet was just a high school,
right?
And I actually had a position with the Kohelet Foundation as well, which is a separate entity, who was really interested in moving the needle with Jewish education. And it was actually wearing my foundation hat that we created what we called the Yeshiva Lab School.
That's cool.
And which is now, we created a middle school also, and then we merged the three with the high school. But it's funny you asked what the model was. I always push back when people say that. We didn't have a model, and they still don't have a model. And that's intentional, because a lot of what I saw was schools that were adopting a model, right? And any model has strengths and it has weaknesses. But perhaps what's most troubling to me about a school that becomes a project-based school, an inquiry-based school, a Montessori school, right? A hybrid learning school, is that you get very fixed, right, into that model, and that's kind of all. It's kind of all you know, and then being adaptable and pivoting becomes very difficult.
It's like what we were just saying before about like being able to ask those questions and being able to change according to the needs.
Right. So speaking of questions, that's what we started our school on. We said, what happens if we start a school based on a question? Not a model, but a question.
Interesting.
And the question being, what do we know about how children learn? And
cool.
and I know it's so often outside of education, the educational world, you say that and they're like, what? I mean, doesn't every school operate that way? And the truth is, no.
Right. Not so much.
There are just so many things that we take for granted that are sort of built into the way we operate school.
For sure.
And we asked ourselves, well, what happens if we go back to basics and we sort of ask ourselves, what do we know about how children learn? And a lot has changed about what we know about how children learn. And we spent a year asking ourselves that question.
Before you created the school?
We launched the school. And we brought some consultants on board who are knee deep in the world of educational theory, of cognitive development, of developmental psychology, and tried to come up with a list of 10 principles. 10 principles not of how we teach, but 10 principles of what we know about how children learn. This is how learning works, according to what the research says. And then once we had this,
well, can you say what those 10 principles were? I know it's a lot, a list of 10, but I'm curious.
It's a lot. I can give you some for sure. We went through multiple iterations to get it into language that could actually be understood by most people.
By non-educators who are knee deep in that.
Exactly. But yeah, I can give you some of them for sure. So for example, context creates connections, right? That we know that anything we learn, right? The way the brain works is you store things, right, in a web, right? There's always connections that are being made. So anytime you learn new information, it's being connected to previous information that you have. It's never stored on its own as sort of a. So when we think about that, then we have to think about what context are we creating for the information that we're giving to our students. And the more we can think about creating that context, the better off they're going to be. So the example I often give is when we first started the school, I remember early on we were teaching kindergartners about Rosh Hashanah. And I remember we were talking about, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the new year, right? And then we asked ourselves, well, do these kids know what a year is?
Interesting.
Do they actually understand the concepts? Because they will be able to parrot back for you.
Right.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the new year, but they don't understand what a calendar is, right? And how a calendar works and what a year is. their understanding of that concept is actually kind of limited. And so we decided we're going to pull this back. We're going to start with a unit on calendars, right, and time, and what that looks like.
That's cool.
Right? And now, once we have that context, we're going to place this into it, right? Or when we would do Parshat Shavua, we would always start with what we did last week. Right, where are we in the bigger story, right, of how this develops, rather than
get a rolling start, rather than just
focusing
zooming in on what's going on here.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So that's context creates connections.
Do you think that's something that parents can use also? Because it sounds like it, like when parents are trying to, either not necessarily, because parents are not necessarily teaching their kids per se information the same way that they're learning it in school, but to try to impart either things that are important to them. Is that something that can be used, or is that more specifically for information?
No, I think it is true about learning always. It's always true, right? So clearly there's a limit to how much context you can give. And sometimes you may, as a parent, you may have to say something and it's not appropriate, to express the larger context. But I would absolutely encourage parents where they can. Yeah, tell them why. Tell them what's the bigger picture, right? That you're trying to get them to understand. And again, it's true, right? It's true in education when you're learning a biology, right? If you can understand the bigger picture, and now I understand how this fits into to what we're talking about as a whole, that's going to stick with me rather than we're just going from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3. It's the same thing with parenting, right? If they can understand why a decision you're making is part of some sort of bigger vision you have for them and for who you want them to be, right? Even if they don't agree with it at the moment, which they can understand that it isn't random. It isn't coming. It's not coming on a whim. It's coming from, and honestly, it forces us as parents, right, to be able to articulate that a little bit better also. So
I feel like the shift has become where parents used to say, when kids would say why, sometimes parents would say because I said so. Now it's becoming like more and more like this idea, and I think it's important for parents to hear this idea of explaining it, being open with the children for them to understand it and have that context. That's a great point. That's a great point.
That was just one.
That was just one. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could have a whole podcast just on any others that you want to say for now. I'll have to come back for episode 2.
Sure. I mean, one of our system mistakes is part of the process, right? Which again is something that schools we don't have the systems to do that well. Most schools, not all schools. Right, which is why F is the worst letter, right? In that you could possibly get in a school. Failure is something which is, and I know it's sort of cliche, and people talk about, well, we have to let kids make mistakes and fail. But the question is, what systems do we actually have, right, for letting that happen in a school where school progress is based on the grades that you get, right? And you make mistakes. If you make a mistake on a test, well, then you're going to get that grade. Maybe you can retake that grade for less credit, but it's not really allowing kids to truly make mistakes.
So how did that work
and learn from them? Well, in the lab school, we didn't give grades
at all.
At all.
And how did that work when they went to either high school or college or?
So we had the good fortune of having our own high school.
Right.
But we did start giving them in 8th grade. Our high school was and still is far more traditional than the lab school, the middle school was. And one of the things I'm most proud of is that the kids who now have come out of those of the lab school now in the middle school and into the traditional high school do absolutely beautifully, even though they've never taken a test.
Nice.
But we didn't even talk about testing. But what we would do though is we had it was mastery based, so it was competency based. Right? So we would literally articulate these are the skills that we need to be learning, right? And we assessed a tremendous amount, and we would actually for every unit pre-assess and post-assess, and we would share that with the parents. These are the skills we're working on. This is what your kid could do now, right? 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, this is what your kid can do now. Right. So we're clearly articulating, right, this is what your child can or cannot do, but it never translates into you're an 83, right? Or you're a 92. And that actually ties into one of our other our other principles, which We called it self-awareness in our principles, but the educational term would be metacognition. But metacognition means that you need to know what you know, right? And know what you don't know.
Interesting.
Right, which is a critical piece of learning,
right.
And so often is what trips kids up.
100%.
Right? Because
yeah,
they don't
I see it all the time.
right? It's that, the parent asks the kid after they had their test, how was the test? Oh, I think it was great. Right. And then a week later, it comes back and like, well, I thought you said it was great, right?
At the end of every
what happened?
I don't give tests anymore either, and I'd love to talk to you more about that. But at the end of all my old tests, I would always put a line of, how well did you think you did on this test? How well did you study for this test? Just for them to be a little bit more aware. And sometimes when it would be like, they'd say, I studied so great, I know it so well, and then they'd get like a 50 or 60. I'd be like,
right,
let's talk about this. Let's see what we could do better next time, so that you can be more aware of your own studying habits, and what can get you to that point where you really are mastering the content. Right.
So that's metacognition, right? That's helping kids recognize what they know and what they don't know. And when you switch to a competency-based approach, so it's much clearer to kids, right? That you've literally outlined, this is what you have mastered at this point. This is what you're still working on. This is where you're really beginning on these areas. And now I know these are the areas that I need to that I need to work on. It's much more complicated. It's harder for teachers. It's harder to communicate to parents, which is something we struggled with mightily. Right, in that model. But at the end of the day, I think that's the approach that ultimately yields the most beneficial educational results.
And are you going to be continuing, not this model, because I mean it's not a model, but using this list of 10 areas of learning in this new high school and new middle school that you're building? So
I don't know that we're gonna publish these 10 in the same way that we did, but we can't not, right? Because I truly believe this is how people learn, right? But like I said before, it's never tied to a particular tool, right? And when you're talking about high school is fundamentally different, right, than middle or elementary school. So now we're going to have a middle and high school in Miami. We're also going to be servicing a very, I think, unique segment of the population there.
In what way?
This school that we're building in Miami is very specifically a school for kids who are the most academically able and academically ambitious.
Interesting.
That's who we are. That's what we're doing. That's the population we're aimed at. We're very clearly saying we're not going to be all things to all people.
Meaning you're looking for only like honors kids, more or less.
All of our classes are going to be taught at an honors level or above.
Got it.
And our feeling is that our large Jewish communities made their first investment probably 70, 80 years ago now in Jewish education, in institutions that can cast the net as wide as possible, which is absolutely the right place, right, to be investing our dollars. And those have been the bedrock of our communities for many years. I think at a certain point, a few decades ago, we recognized that we as a community need to invest in our learners for whom school is difficult, right? For whom, the traditional methods aren't working or challenged either academically or socially, emotionally. And we've created tremendous resources for those students as well. I don't think our communities yet have made an investment on those kids who really can be soaring, right? Whose potential perhaps is not being fully tapped in our schools, but perhaps even more importantly, whose needs aren't being completely met in our schools. And they have needs, right? They have needs which are different, and they don't get met because these kids tend to do school well or can get by. Right. Often they compensate for their deficits with some of their real strengths.
Interesting.
Right? But those deficits then don't really get serviced in the ways that they should be. So our goal here with the Jewish Leadership Academy is to say Miami's got great schools. There's lots of really good choices. There have been investments in these schools that cast the net wide. There have been investments in the kids who struggle more in certain areas in school. And now we're going to try to make an investment in these kids who we think whose potential isn't 100% being tapped and whose needs aren't being 100% met.
Wow. Sounds really, really cool. It's amazing. It's incredible. And so you said that you're not going to be publishing that 10. Are there things that you're tweaking? Are there things that you are changing slightly, or you're going to keep keep the idea going for the most part, or there are things that you are planning on
Oh no, there's nothing on there that I would change
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. I think we'll probably talk about them all in various different contexts. I'll give you one example, and one of the others that we didn't speak about is voice and choice.
Mm-hmm.
Voice meaning opportunities for kids to for teachers to enable our students to hear what's actually on their mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? To get their voice into the classroom in a way that they feel, right, that they are pushing the learning, right, around some of their own ideas,
Right, to empower them
some
to
of
be
their own
part of the learning
interests.
process.
Right.
Right.
And then there's there's choice, right, which is a different idea, right?
Mm.
Choice means that I'm empowered to have some control,
Mm.
right, over
That's very powerful.
how my learning happens. And that idea of choice is one that's sort of at the center of our learning model here in Miami.
Interesting. More so than it was in Philly.
Far more so, because again, now we're talking about a middle and high school. In a high
Right.
school, you can empower kids to make choices.
Totally.
But it also comes out of the fact that because we're going to be selective with our student body, we're going to have the opportunity to run tracks that instead of thinking about multiple tracks that are vertically aligned, meaning it's the same course material, but I'm going to teach it in a regular level and an honors level and an advanced level. So now I can take that, if my kids are all at an honors level,
Right.
I can now sort of make that a horizontal choice, meaning you have 3 different course materials you can take, all taught at the same
Wow.
level, right? And now giving kids that opportunity to choose which of those classes they want to take creates a certain level of buy-in, right? Creates a certain level of empowerment, and I think ultimately leads
You're saying
to
3
greater
different
success.
levels, 3 not 3 different levels, 3 like horizontally on the same topic, or different topics that they can choose whichever.
So probably within the same discipline, within the same subject, but slightly different classes, right? So
Interesting.
every semester, let's say your English course, right? You may be able to choose between a course on the Harlem Renaissance, or a course on poetry, or a course on novel writing.
That's very cool.
Right? And the same thing we're going to try and do in the Judaics as well. Is that we're actually going to bet, right, that a kid who does have some choice over what subject they would prefer to learn, right, is going to connect to that material that much more. And so
probably need to have a lot more staff for that also.
Well, again, it's not really, because it's the same 3 courses, right? It's the same 3 courses. We're just reorienting the way that they're aligned, because we're saying we're not built to service that wide swath of the community. We can't do that. But with this population, like, it affords us to do that.
And what if a student comes to you and says, I don't really connect to any of those? Like, meaning you're offering 3. Within those 3, I'm not connecting.
So that goes back to a conversation that I would have all the time with parents at Kohelet, as they were looking at our school, and they would see choice, right? And they get all worried, right? That, so if my child chooses not to learn math, they don't have to learn math. And I would say, no, that's never the case. And I think this is, by the way, great parenting advice also. To give kids choice does not mean that all choices are available to them, right? You can, the difference though between saying you have to do A, right, or you can do A or B, you make a choice, is like night and day.
Sure.
Right? It's like night and day. And even if even if it's, you have to do both A and B, right, but you can choose which one you want to do first. Right? That too is incredibly empowering. It's different than being a totally passive recipient.
Right.
So here too, we can't give you all the choices in the world. That's not the intent. It's It's not a school where anything you choose goes. But to offer them the opportunity to make some choices and to have some control over the destiny of their learning trajectory is something that we're going to try to do really at every stage of their learning.
Wow, very, very cool. And what role do you see the school playing in family life, educating the family, educating the parents? Do you see that being a part of? Is that one of your goals, or is that not necessarily?
It's a great question. I think it has to be one of our goals. I actually anticipate that in Miami, with the demographic that we intend to serve, I think it's actually going to become really critical. I think we're going to have a lot of families for whom, who aren't necessarily going to shul every Shabbos, right? For whom shul is not kind of that sort of centerpiece in their homes. And I think school affords an opportunity, right, to provide that in a way that that their shuls may not be. And so we were definitely thinking about what, adult education or outreach kind of looks like on that front. And I think that there are people who are craving it. I think we have to be realistic, right? I think parents live busy lives, right?
Sure.
And I think any school administrator who's tried to run programming for their parents knows that you're not going to get them all there. And certainly, if this is educational programming, around, it's generally the parents who don't need it, right, are the ones who show up. And that's always our frustration. So I don't have sort of a grandiose view of how, but I think that offering it for those parents who want to feel connected, who want to feel a sense of community, I think that schools offer that in ways that is somewhat unique because you're already vested, right? You're already connected,
right.
And I think that if we can create relationships between our teachers and our parents in a way that it doesn't always go through the student, I think that the sum total of that becomes a lot stronger than if it's just a student-based relationship.
Totally. Yeah, that's awesome. How do you think that schools and parents can create that partnership in a better way?
Yeah.
I know you said that was like hard in Philly. It was to communicate everything that was happening. How to,
Yeah, I think first of all, just recognizing that it is a partnership,
sure,
right, and for both sides to recognize that it's a partnership is really critical.
What do you think that means on each side?
Yeah, so I think what that means is that for a partnership to work, right, there has to be equal respect on both sides. There has to be no partnership works where both partners have the same skill set.
Right. Sure.
Right. That doesn't make for a good partnership. Right. So a good partnership means that each one recognizes the role that the other plays, that the skills that the other one brings to the table. But I would say what a partnership also means, though, is that each side is empowered to ask questions of the others. So even if this isn't my skill set, there's value for you to see my work, right, and to ask me questions about my work and me about yours, even though I'm not the expert in your area and you're not the expert in mine.
Interesting.
And I think that's the model that we need with our parents. I think that all too often our parents assume because they were educated, they know how to educate, and that doesn't work very well. And it's not fair, and it's not true, and it doesn't honor what our educators do and what they've been through.
That's very true.
But at the same time, they should feel empowered to ask questions, right? And to ask why we're doing things, and to genuinely ask why.
Yeah, I just had parent-teacher conferences last week, and parents started asking me a bunch of questions on, in my honors class, and is this challenging enough? And I explained the model, and it forced me, first of all, like you said before, to articulate what we're doing. And then after that question, they were like, wow, that's amazing. I didn't even realize that that's what you're doing. And I was like, I was so happy that we had that conversation, because it really, the question was a great question, and gave me the chance to answer in a way that really explained it for them to understand and not have those like worries that they were worrying about. And it was great. It was awesome.
Right. And then I'd say the educators understanding that that's the case. So let's be proactive about explaining why.
Right.
And helping parents understand why we're doing what we're doing in our class, and not just to assume they should just trust me. Right.
Right.
I think both those have to be true.
It's a very good point. Very, very good point. I keep finding that students are coming out of the Jewish day school system, and that they are lacking certain basic skills sometimes, whether it's reading Jewish texts or even sometimes lacking the connection with God, with Hashem, that we would think that they would have. Is what ways you have this incredible opportunity to create your own school from scratch, and I know you're like spending years working on it and so busy with it. Is that how can your school help tackle those issues? I know you mentioned the way that you're going about the learning, but how can specifically these two areas?
So it's important to know we have a different demographic, right? that we're
Sure.
looking to service here in Miami, different than any school population I've ever dealt with before, and so our goals and our objectives are a little bit different. Right? Our focus at JLA is really a student body who is leaving the Jewish day school world, primarily after 5th grade, for the secular independent schools. the top tier secular independent schools in the Miami area, which are filled, unfortunately, with Jewish kids.
Interesting.
And so our foundation is making an incredible investment in trying to create a school that actually can go toe to toe with these top tier independent schools, offering a secular education that literally compares, if not exceeds, what these other schools can do on a campus that exceeds, if not compares to what these other schools can do. And so our goals with this student body is really to bring them into a Jewish environment and get them feeling connected, right? Because we know, right, if they stay on that trajectory in the independent school, secular independent school world, the chances of them identifying, feeling connected, committed to their Yiddishkeit over the long term is almost not.
So besides for, I guess, academically bringing them into the Jewish text and the Jewish studies, how are you going to give them, like your goal to try to keep them connected? How are you going to give them that, the geschmack of being a Jew? And
right. You ready for this one?
Sure.
We're taking the whole school, 8th grade through 12th grade, to Israel for the first month of school.
No way.
Every year.
No way. How?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Doing what there? What's the?
It is going to be, depending on when Yontif falls out, it'll be anywhere from 3.5 to 4 weeks of intensive immersion in Tanakh, Jewish history, Jewish thought, Israel, Zionism, Ulpan.
That is so cool.
It's a 3.5 week, 4 week Shabbaton, if you can imagine.
Yeah, seriously.
Or it's going to try and build on the success of camp. Right, the success of informal Jewish education, to have an intensive experience of that sort, which is not a one and done,
right?
But actually builds on itself, right, each year. So we get to think about, what does it look like for an 8th grader, and how is that different than what it should look like for a 10th grader or for a 12th grader?
Wow! And you're bringing everyone. You're going to have a campus? Like, how are you going to...
Yes, we are partnering with the Alexander Muss High School in Israel.
Oh, cool.
We are using their campus.
Very
they
nice.
are designing a program for us very different than anything they do for other schools.
So cool.
For other schools, they try to mimic their general studies program as well. We're not interested in that. We're going to do our own general studies when they get back.
So during that time, you're just doing...
100% Kodesh, Zionism, Israel, Ulpan. 100%.
So cool.
And our bet is that we will get greater, results, greater impact, greater connection from that than we would having another 40-minute period, or even 2 40-minute periods over the course of the year. So we're going to do less on that front, which will enable us to run an academic program similar to those other independent schools.
Interesting.
Right. But
so during the regular year, like after you get back, there's going to be less
Limudei Kodesh during the year.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
But we are our gamble, our big, our experiment is,
that's very cool.
Can we get it in this sort of lived experiential environment over 4 weeks? We hope we can.
Yeah, that's very cool. I wish you much health. That's very, very cool. And you mentioned that the foundation, is behind creating this school. Are they focused? Is the foundation focused on other areas of education besides for just creating the school, or any other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are. This isn't public yet, but I guess this is a great place to announce it, right?
There we go.
We are working on a program that will allow all of the Miami area day schools the opportunity for their faculty to continue their education in any way. So anybody who wants to pursue a master's degree, a certificate in anything, we're going to try and help fund that.
Wow, you heard it here first. That's very cool.
Heard it here first. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
That's very cool. Wow.
But it's sort of a larger project to try and kind of raise the caliber of education across the board for all of our area day schools. We are involved with a bunch of other projects. Israel Education. We as a foundation don't only do education, so we're focused on projects that are going to help kind of just our most vulnerable community members in a variety of different ways.
Sure.
We have a dream. We have our next major dream after getting this school up and off the ground is actually to build an affordable housing project for Jewish educators.
Wow.
That would allow them to live as they should.
That's cool.
And not have to worry, right? About,
and that specifically in Miami, I assume.
Well, we try to model it in Miami, and if it works, then hopefully, it's something that others can try elsewhere.
Cool. That's very cool. I hope so.
Yeah.
So for all the formal educators in the education world, for sure, that'd be very cool. What would you say to a young mechanech who's starting out in the field?
I would say to a young mechanech, try new things, broaden your horizons, expand your repertoire. I think that you'll find that the things that led you into education aren't necessarily the only things you can do in education. And there may be other areas you didn't think you'd enjoy, that you might actually.
Interesting.
And so that means volunteering for things, right? That means letting yourself, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And, when they assign you that class that you're really not sure you know that much about, throw yourself in, right? And
totally.
you might actually see that you enjoy it, right? Or if you're convinced that you can only teach those upper tracks, try it. Try and see what happens. If you expand your repertoire a little bit and teach kids you didn't think you could teach. Try your hand at things outside of the classroom, and because look, at the end of the day, the more experiences you have, right, the more skills you have, the more marketable you're going to be,
sure,
right, and I think the more fulfilled you're going to feel, right, because I think that when we get locked in as an educator and this is what we do, I think the potential for burnout gets that much higher, right, and I think you see it.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think we're wired to want to grow, right? I think that's just how we are as people,
totally,
right?
Sure.
And the number of people you think about, right, who start their career in student activities, right? And then at a certain point, it's like, okay, well, I've done I've done Shabbatones for and now what, right? And I think the same thing happens with your formal educators. It's okay, so I've been teaching, Gemara for X number of years, and I feel stale, and now what?
Totally.
So I think even from early on, and yes, it can feel overwhelming when you're just getting your feet under you, and every year in every class you're teaching, it's like, I've never taught this material before. Sure. But I'd say keep pushing yourself. Every year try something new, take on something new, and if you ever find yourself, in a place where I'm just pulling out the notes from last year, and I'm just going, then something's wrong, right? You're getting sure. stale, and you need some new opportunities to both to energize you, and I think to prepare you to move forward.
Right. I heard recently I think it was Behind the Bima with Rav Y.Y. Jacobson, and he was saying that if you just take your notes out from the previous year, you're being a copy of yourself. You're not actually being yourself, even though you might be, you might act the exact same way, but there's something missing. And like you're saying, constantly reinventing and really redoing things in a really fresh way. It's so important.
Yeah.
What shifting focus is now? What would you say to parents? What advice? Anything? Any messages?
I really do believe, and as I said before, you're asking the wrong half of the couple, but I'll share a few things with you on the parenting side. First of all, what we were speaking about before, again, this idea of choice, I think, is incredibly powerful. This shifts a little bit back to the educational world, but there is one of my favorite pieces in the Netziv. It is his parish on the phrase Chacham Leif. I think the first time it appears is in Parshas Tetzaveh. There he says Chachmas HaLev is Yiras Hashem. But in later on in Vayakel, he asked the following question, right? In trying to understand or add an additional layer of interpretation on this word Chacham Lev, he says, how's it possible that we had Jewish people in the Midbar who knew how to do tapestry,
right,
and gold work, right, and engineering,
something that people I feel like don't
and
think about enough. Yeah,
like where did they come from? Right? They were slaves in Egypt. How did it happen? So he literally writes. He says, "This is what happened. Call one out and said, anybody who's interested in doing this work, come to the Mishkan." Right? And they had all these different areas, right, sort of set up, right, and they asked them, "What would you like to do?" Right. And once they got to make that choice, and Ziv literally writes there, making the choice advances their learning, right, far or accelerates their learning far faster than they would if they hadn't chosen that particular area.
Right.
And that's how they did it, right? Just by saying, well, I've always wanted to, to be a gold worker, then all right, go ahead and do it. And you're going to see how they're going to blossom. So I think that's true in education. I think it's true in parenting. I think listening and tuning yourself in early on to what is it that gets your child, passionate? Where do they really feel like they're in their element? And not where you get passionate or would have. My third child, our son Benny, was when he was 2 years old. Like, we were noticing at the table for some meals, he's like, he's going like this, and he's got he's keeping a rhythm, which was just unbelievable. And so, we got him a drum set when he was young. And to this day, it's an area, it's an outlet for him, and he's so cool. He's sort of found his musical voice, and it wasn't like that with any of our other kids, but that was his thing.
Right.
So I'd say, yeah, give your children opportunities, and then listen closely, right? Listen, watch what makes them shine. And
sometimes for kids though, it's hard because they're so young, they don't really know. They think they're interested in this, but maybe they don't really know. Like, how do you go along with that?
And that's okay.
Just go along with it.
That's okay.
Right.
And that one thing can change, right? It really can.
It's a great point. It's a really great point.
I think it's just as important that they know that you're trying to tune in to their particular, gifts or interests. And as much as it is that what they're actually doing. So if it changes from year to year, that's also okay, right? But their knowledge that you want to know, and you're helping them to explore themselves and figure out who they are, I think goes a very, very long way.
Yeah, totally. And who were your role models in parenting?
I would say it's my wife.
That's right. Wow.
I'd say it's my wife.
What aspect is your?
I just think she has done a phenomenal job of being excelling in her professional life, which she truly does. She's an assistant principal now in Katz Yeshiva High School in Boca.
Nice.
But always making our kids feel like they have her attention, they have her ear. The most inspiring thing to me is that my kids come to her to talk about anything. Really? And she is there,
how did you create that?
Confidant. Again, you gotta get her on. Let her speak for herself. But she's like the same way she is with her students. She's an amazing listener, and she listens deeply. And I think that when kids feel that way, right, when they know somebody A is not judging and B is listening deeply to what it is you're saying, and not pretending that they hear, but actually hear, I think that creates, a desire to come back and talk to them again. The next time there's something on your mind.
Totally. And you're as a head of school and creating a school, you must be incredibly busy. And over the years, you've been incredibly busy. How did you make sure to still devote time to parenting and being there for your children? Yeah. And also, I guess your wife also. I mean, your wife is also, like you said, she excels in her profession, but also makes sure to always be there and to be able to be a listening ear.
So I don't know that I've done it. I don't know that I've done it. Certainly, I know that I haven't done it perfectly. That's for sure. And I don't even know how well I've done it. But what I can tell you is a few things. First of all, it happens to be, and I know for many people this isn't the case, but it happens to be in our family, having my kids in my own school actually has worked quite well for us.
Really?
And that was the case throughout for the last 15 years. For the most part, I've had all of my kids
that's cool.
in my school all the time. And I know for me, that's helped me not only to see them, but to understand their world and their lives and their teachers and what's going on.
It's like really doing in their lives.
Right.
Cool.
Now, it's a challenge because at the same time, I can't be the advocate for my kids as a parent,
right?
Because when I say something to that teacher, right, obviously it means something very different than when my parent did.
Right.
But I think just being able to be plugged in that way with help, and obviously that's not great advice for most other people who don't have that opportunity. But I'll give you one other piece that kind of sticks out for me. And honestly, I don't know if this is latov or lara. I honestly don't know, but I'll say it anyway. If you would say to any of my kids, just say the words, and take them in totally different rooms and say the words, vacation Abba, their faces will light up.
Really?
They'll know exactly what you're talking about. This is a term that they coined, right, which referred to the fact that there were times where I put school away, right? My whole demeanor changed, right? They could sense I was a different person, right? And that I was there, I was with them. It was light. We were having fun, we were joking around. And again, I don't know if that's latov or lara. I don't know if that's just a reflection of how bad things were, when we weren't on vacation. But I do know that creating those moments and those spaces, and these aren't fancy vacations. It doesn't have to cost a lot. It's just a matter of putting everything away, getting away somewhere, right? And just letting your guard down, letting your defenses down, putting that phone away, and your kids know. They know when you're there, and they know when you're not there.
Totally.
And so I think just making sure that we had moments like that, and that they weren't too far and few between, and that you as a mechanech, or you as a school leader, or you as an executive are being clear with whoever it is that you work for, that you need to have those times where you're just offline. I think that it creates sort of a bank or a library of moments that are the ones that your kids really do remember,
Totally.
and that sticks with them,
It's
for a
very true.
lifetime.
No, I grew up in the house of an educators also.
Right.
And also I remember, we had good times going up, even not necessarily always vacation, but I remember vacation Ava also. I remember when we, I never liked ice skating, but I remember I have such a vivid memory of my dad going ice skating with, with my siblings, and, all these different trips that we did, and like these great road trips. And, I remember that sticks out to me more sometimes than those other moments, which is really interesting.
Right.
So,
and remember, vacation Ava can be a bike ride on a Sunday afternoon.
Totally.
Right? And that's harder for me. It's harder for me to like turn it on and turn it off for a couple of hours, but some people really can. And I would encourage those people who can, to do so. Don't wait for, twice a year on vacation. But if you can do it on a Sunday afternoon, on a Sunday morning, then just those moments where you're just 100% there, those are the moments your kids are going to remember.
Totally. How did you get your children to connect to Hashem? I guess we could talk children and also students, but I guess we'll start with children.
Work in progress, always a work in progress.
Sure.
The first thing is, I think it's important, again, to recognize that each child is different, and their connections are going to be based on different things. And therefore the schooling choices that they may need, may be different. The role models that they need may be different. So, I have one kid for whom the world of learning, and it is really just that's his world. He embraced it from a from a young age. We started learning Mishnayos together when he was, I think, 5, and really never stopped. And to this day, that's where he finds his greatest connection.
That's cool.
I mentioned a moment ago, I have another son for whom music was just his thing, and listening to that and saying, okay, so how do we, how do we, so I'll give you a great example. In each of their, bar bat mitzvah, right? Each of them looked quite different, right? Our oldest son, he made us see him on several sidarim, and like that was his thing. That's what he needed to shine.
Yeah.
Right. And my daughter, she sings beautifully. So we did a kunzitz for women, right? A Mlava Malka for women, in which she sang and led. Right. And then
that's beautiful.
And then we did something similar for my next son, for whom was the drummer. Right. We said, all right, we're going to do like this shalosh that moves into Havdalah. And,
that's real chanach on our piedarko. It's beautiful.
And each of them, I think, when they felt like that, that this was a way that they could connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it was different, necessarily than what their older siblings.
It's like what you were saying before, of like really listening to what their wants are, and channeling that. That's really special. Wow, right. That's incredible.
And then look, I think there's what you do at home, right? There's what you bring into your home, and there's the role model that you set, in your home, and the kids watch.
Totally.
They do.
Totally. And I heard you mention on another podcast that for educators need to develop the skill set to talk about Hashem. It's not necessarily always so easy for them to have that skill set, because they didn't grow up either being educated how to, or they didn't grow up with that. So how can educators develop that? And also how can parents develop that, which is, two very different things.
Yeah. So yes, I believe deeply that one of our challenges is that we talk about Hashem a lot when kids are little, right? Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, right?
Uncle Moshe did it great.
He did a fantastic job. And then we stop, right? And then we stop. And we take it for granted, right? That we've done that and kids know that. And now we're ready to, now we're ready to move on. And the challenge is that our conception then of what God is often stuck in first and second grade, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest of us is developing and maturing and thinking and asking questions, and that piece of it remains underdeveloped. And honestly, it doesn't necessarily fare terribly well, when it's underdeveloped that way. I think part of the challenge, as you referred to, is that we are mechanchim and mechanchot themselves. Very often are people who have kind of natural inclination towards emunah. It's not something that they struggled with terribly much,
right.
And therefore they never needed the tools or the language, to talk about it more, and so they aren't necessarily empowered to do that.
So how do they?
So what do we do?
Yeah.
So what do we do?
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. So first of all, I think that we do have educators out there who have been thinking about these things from different perspectives and different ways, whether it be the more philosophical side, whether it be more from the world of Chassidus and perhaps even Kabbalah, and I think we need to harness those people. I think we need to give them opportunities.
Who are some of those people?
I think in Israel, right, you have Rav Dov Zinger, and you have others who are working in that particular mode and model. But I think even here, again, I don't know that it's it's some sort of giant, but I think we have young people on Mechanchim and Mechanchot who are coming out who have studied a bit of Chabad and have taken something from that world, who are more conversant in the world of Jewish philosophy. And I think we need to find ways in our schools to give those people a platform to talk about things that actually have been meaningful and helpful for them. You take a place like Yeshivat Araita, which they have a derech, right? Sure. At least some of their Rosh Yeshiva do, and so now how do we tap into some of the people who and bring that down to a high school level, right, where kids can start talking about those approaches as well. But I think even beyond that, I think even if we don't have all the language and all the tools, I think that just opening up conversation with our kids and being real about it.
Conversation, you're saying specifically about Hashem?
Yeah, really about Hashem. So I would do, in Kohelet, a course, it's once a week, over the 11th grade, with all of our 11th graders on faith. Right? And the way I would start, it sounds almost disrespectful, but the way I would start was that within the introduction to the lowly men of faith, the Rav writes, that he was never terribly bothered by issues of science and the Torah, or never terribly bothered by the authorship, the questions around the authorship of the Torah, or how God could actually reveal himself, an infinite being could reveal himself to finite beings, and on and on. It's a whole list of things that he was never bothered by. So I always tell them that first class, I said, listen, the reason why I'm teaching this class is because I'm not the Rav.
Right, you were bothered by
I have been bothered by every one of these questions, and I still am.
Right.
And I don't have all the answers. Right? But what I'm going to share with you are some approaches I've developed over the years that have helped either satisfy me or at least take the edge of the question. And I want to share them with you. Right. And you'll just, and there's always going to be multiple approaches to any question we're asking, and you're going to decide which one of them really speaks to you.
So you developed this ability to talk about it through philosophy and through.
It's largely through philosophical texts for sure, both from within our Masorah and those that from out that help, but not like deep and heavy philosophy. We would do this with all of our 11th graders, and in combined class, it wasn't tracked. But it was light enough, that everybody really, I think, could dive in and contribute something. And how much it helped, I can't say for sure,
Right,
but I know at least at the moment kids appreciated that opportunity.
Sure.
I would hear from parents, that came back and we're talking about the kinds of things we talked about in school. So
that's a big sign right there.
I'd say finding those people, those members of your faculty, right, who have wrestled with some of these questions, for whom, and giving them opportunities to, and spread their impact a little bit wider than just maybe a schmooze in their own particular class, on a Friday.
Interesting. That's a good idea.
Give them the opportunity to speak to, more widely and to do what they do and they do uniquely,
right,
across a larger swath of your student.
That's a great idea. Wow. And what about for parents? How can parents...
Yeah, so I think for parents, it's somewhat similar in the sense that I think that as parents, we're often afraid to be vulnerable around our questions and around our own religious development.
That's very true.
And I think our kids will sometimes interpret that as, you have it all figured out, right? But I don't, and therefore we're different, right? And because you go to shul, every morning, or because you, mom, daven every morning, right? You must have, you have no questions, right? You have it all. You've got it all figured out. I can't relate to that, So I think that opening up, and obviously it has to be developmentally appropriate.
Right. I was going to say, what age would that be?
Right, it's not when kids are still developing. I'd say it's high school age. And be real with them. Was davening always easy for you? And if it was, good. Own that, right? Own it. Davening was always easy for me, but you know what? This is an area that's been difficult for me.
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of, and I'm just going to give you one example. And we have plenty of men in our community who struggle with all sorts of different areas of Jewish life. We have women. I mean, there are women for whom hair covering is not easy.
Yeah,
it's not easy, right? Do their daughters at a certain point know that? Do they know that it was a struggle for them? And that it, because it'll make the real difference.
Yeah, that's such a great point.
Right?
That's so insightful.
To know that no, it's not just a given, right? It was hard.
Vulnerability with children.
But I did
so
it.
important.
Right?
Wow.
But yeah, I know that Aryeh Ben David in his Ayeka program, right, really stresses this a lot. Sort of that sense of opening yourself up. And as a teacher, there need to be boundaries as to how far we introduce our personal lives into them. But that sense of vulnerability, of opening ourselves up, of making it real for our kids, I think for parents, it is extremely important.
It's interesting because I once had a very interesting experience. I was once on a flight to visit my in-laws, and this person sitting next to me on the plane, I was learning Gemara on the plane ride. This person sitting next to me says, "What are you learning? What Gemara are you learning?" Didn't look like a Jew. Didn't like at all. And turns out, not gonna say who it was, but he was actually very, very familiar with with Judaism. He was actually a rabbi himself and trained in a lot of texts and had gone off. And during this flight, he started questioning me a lot. And I was in smicha at the time. And it really messed with my brain a lot. It really, really, really messed with me. And I came back from that trip. I was in smicha. I came back and I was like, I need help. I need to discover. So that, and I remember at the time being like, why did I have to have this experience? And then I thought to myself, maybe the reason I had to have it was so that I could be able to answer some of these questions later on. And I remember actually this year I shared it with my students for the first time that I had that experience because they were asking me some questions and I told them about the experience. And they really, you could see the defenses starting going down because they were like, wait, you're being so vulnerable about an experience that you had with questions of faith. And the fact that, they look up and say like, oh, Rabbi, Rabbi Shalom, whatever. But no, I went through some experiences even when I was studying to be a rabbi and I was still having those challenges, those difficulties. And it, like you said, it was a really powerful experience for my students. It's so interesting. I love the point about vulnerability with your own children also. It's very, very powerful. Thank you for sharing. What would you say are the unique challenges of educating and parenting today's youth and teens?
I think it's hard to escape what I think is the biggest challenge that we're all facing, which is just the mental health amongst our kids.
Interesting.
I mean, the skyrocketing levels of depression, anxiety, other mental health issues that our kids are struggling with today.
Wow.
Which we don't really have good statistics yet, but we knew they were already far higher in this generation than they had been in previous generations.
Totally.
And then we have COVID.
Yeah.
Right? And we know that COVID has accelerated that.
Totally. I've seen the effects of COVID
right?
in my students in a crazy way.
I think we all have. We all know it's there. And so it's gone from bad to worse.
Yeah.
I think there's no way around that.
So what do we do about that?
So the first thing we need to do is we need to be able to identify it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, we need to, and I think even more so as parents than as educators.
Yeah, I was going to say this is probably more relevant for parents.
It really is. We need to know what anxiety looks like. We need to know what depression looks like. We need to know the various forms, that it comes in, because doesn't always show up. Right.
But parents, I feel like, are so not always, but not always equipped to be able to deal with that, because they maybe like we were just saying, they didn't deal with it themselves, so they don't know. They don't know the signs. They don't. So how do parents handle all this?
Yeah. So I think that first of all, you just have to be clued into shifts,
Mm-hmm.
right? To dramatic change. When you feel like something in your child is not right, chances are something in your child is not right.
Right.
And we also need to get over the stigma which is still there, right? Where somehow mental health and physical health are two totally different areas, right? One's real and one's not.
Right.
And it's just psychological,
Mm-hmm.
as if it's just physical. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's
Totally.
just psychological. Doesn't make any sense either, right? If it's psychological, it's real, right? And psychological can cause pain,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
And worse, right? So I think we need to be tuned into it. I think if we see shifts in our kids, things we can't necessarily explain due to a physical ailment of some sort, we need to start asking questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's plenty of good information and resources online, right, for identifying the various signs of whether it be anxiety or depression. But the sooner that we see it, and the sooner that we open ourselves up to it and get and help our kids get the help and the resources, support that they need, the better off our kids are going to be.
Yeah, totally.
And it's often when it goes untreated and or intentionally ignored, right, that we'll end up with bigger kids and bigger problems,
right?
When they get to high school or sometimes even college and young adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to own this as a community and as a society. The numbers are incredibly high, so there's a very good chance, unfortunately, good chance.
It's very true,
right? That your child, if you have 4 or 5 children, it's almost a given, right? That at least one of your children is going to be struggling with a mental health issue at some point, right? In their adolescence or even younger, and okay, so we would have wished it wasn't that way, but we do have plenty of ways today, right, to help, right, and to treat in ways that we didn't before, and we have to get those kids the help that they need.
Right. So you're saying, as parents, being aware of it is just the first step, but then after that, taking them to whatever it is to get them the help that they need.
Exactly. Whether it's a therapist, and that's certainly where we would start,
Mm-hmm.
always, right, is with with a psychologist of some sort, right? And perhaps it's behavioral therapy if they're younger kids. Perhaps it's play therapy. Ultimately, again, if a psychologist, if a medical professional says, I think medication is a good route, I think we have to be okay, and understand that just like we would take medication for anything else, this might be, it will change your child's life. Again, and as coming it from the vantage point of a school administrator, the number of kids that we've seen whose parents do take it seriously, and get them the help they need, whose lives change so dramatically,
right?
When they do, I can't emphasize enough, right? The bracha it can be, and the gift that it can be to your children, right? If you've tuned into it and get them the help that they need.
Unfortunately, I think, like you're saying, unfortunately, it's like a stigma that I feel like people are not necessarily so okay with being so open about, and that's why it's a little bit of this taboo in our community, which is a shame. And I'm so happy that you're bringing that to light, because I think it's important for our listeners to hear it, and for all educators, all parents, educators to be thinking about it, because like you're saying, it's so prevalent and so it's such a major issue that people are dealing with and challenged with these days. I'm happy you said it, and it's interesting that you didn't say technology, because I feel like most people usually say technology, which I'm happy you didn't say. But what would you say is your take on technology?
First of all, I actually think they're related, right?
I agree.
Jean Twenge in her book iGen, right? She kind of draws the connection between the two. That in fact we've seen this spike in mental health issues once technology became ubiquitous in sort of this iGen where everybody's got their own device and can be connected all the time, and the rise of social media, right, and the impact that social media has on our kids' own sense of self, right? Which no question about it that they're deeply related to one another.
Yeah, the leaked Instagram files and everything, all that.
Right, for 100%.
Sure. It's clear.
But when it comes to technology, I would differentiate. I would say not all technology is the same. I wouldn't lump it all together.
Sure.
I would say we obviously need to recognize that, and we now know for sure that the appeal of that there's much that our kids are doing online that is intentionally addictive, right? It's intended that way, right? That's how we draw them in. Like it's the infinite scroll, right? Which is intended in order to keep you connected and just continuously keep you connected, right? So we have to understand it is an intentionally addictive substance. That's what it is.
Totally.
Right. And just like the tobacco industry, who knew this was addictive, but that was part of the marketing plan, right? Because it gets you to keep buying more if you're addicted to it.
Right. I mean, the people who are creating these apps, they know exactly what they're doing.
Absolutely know that's the case. So we have to treat it that way. We have to recognize that that's the case. And so we have to be putting limits on our kids, because otherwise they will get sucked in. It's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Totally.
But at the same time, and this was kind of an interesting learning experience for me, our relationship with our kids' technology changed dramatically between child number 1 and child number 4.
Interesting.
We never had a TV in the house. And, but so my oldest grew up, we had a VCR, and we had, watch some tapes, or maybe we had DVDs that he would watch when we would put it on for him. Right. To the point where my youngest is in 6th grade now, has his own laptop and has his own. It's extremely different. But I've also realized that technology itself has changed, because when my youngest, my 6th grader, gets online, right, and is playing in his world in the areas that we allow him, right, to do. It's actually very different than when my older kids would play video games, right? Because he's actually going online with his friends. Right. And now he's moved to Boca, and he's still on with his friends from Philadelphia.
Interesting.
Which includes now his friends from Boca. And they're actually talking to each other. It's actually not that different than getting together for a play date, right? They're actually having real social interaction with each other.
That's such an interesting take. Wow.
Building something together, cooperating with each other, quarreling with each other, which is part of the part of the learning experience.
Sure.
And that is fundamentally different, right, than just interacting with a screen, being passive on your own in your own little place. So I wouldn't lump those things together. And some of these, if they're just going around playing Fortnite and shooting each other, right, then again, that's one I would seriously question that, right? But if they're building things together, right, if they're creating worlds together, I think that there's some real value to what to what they're doing. So I wouldn't write off technology as also. I would say, again, so it's two things. It's number one, yes, we have to set limits. No question about it. We have to understand this stuff is addictive. But number two, I think it's important. I think it's very important to be able to articulate to your kids the difference between sort of passive technology, where I'm scrolling through YouTube and I'm just watching, or TikTok, or, that, and there may be something that's valuable on TikTok also. I don't know, honestly. But there may be. But there's a difference between just scrolling through stuff I'm passive about, right? And actually engaging socially with real people who right? And using technology as a way to build those kind of social skills and social relationships.
Right. Talking about setting limits, what's your take towards discipline?
My take towards discipline is that discipline has to be a learning opportunity, right? Which means that you have to be extremely clear with why a child has stepped over a line, right? What the line was that they stepped over, and it's really important that the consequence, is in line
Right.
with the offense, with
Right,
whatever
right,
it is
right,
that
right.
they
Totally.
do. As a parent, and again, I'm speaking only, not as somebody who does this perfectly, but somebody who's thought about it, knows what they're supposed to do, whether they actually do, right?
Right.
So many times it's our own frustration that gets the best of us,
Yeah.
and and for good reason. Like, we're human also, right? And we do get frustrated.
Yeah.
Like, that's just part of the human condition. But making sure that when that happens, right, we are able to take a step back, right, and whatever consequence we're giving our child is one that actually does fit, right, what the child has done or hasn't done. And then there's also, perhaps most importantly, and this is true for mechanchim, it's true for parents, the most important thing you can do when it comes to discipline is be consistent. Because the minute we're not, it all goes down the tubes.
They see right through it.
They see right through it. It's, why did you do this? You did it for this one this way. You did it for me this way. Last time it was okay, and this time it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Last time I came to class late, nobody said anything. This time I came to class late, somebody said something. Last time I wore this skirt, nobody cared. Right? This time, and they lose respect.
Yeah.
Right.
So quickly. Like, just like that.
Right. So, we always had this rule when it came to our administrative meetings, when we're thinking about our handbook and such. Like, are we ready to enforce this? Are we ready to enforce it across? If we're not ready to enforce it across the board, better that it not be on the books. Right. It's just because we lose. We all lose.
So how do parents and educators, I guess, bring things in if they didn't introduce it in the beginning? Because then it's like going against that consistency, saying, they realize, okay, this is something that we weren't doing a good job at. We want to be better about that. We want to be a little stricter on that. We want to, enforce that a little more. How do they do that without their children being like, wait, that was okay before, like that,
Own it. Just own it. Say,
Right.
Listen, up until now, we really haven't been consistent on this. We recognize that, but we've been thinking about it, and we really think this is important. So starting now, this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And but follow through.
Yeah.
Follow through. And if you think you can parent or educate by making threats and not following through on those threats, you're just not going to do it. Your kids know. They know. And much better that you don't threaten at all.
Totally.
Right? Than that you threaten and don't follow through, don't see it through.
As we start to wrap up, I want to talk about a heavy topic.
Okay.
Tefillah. Tefillah is, we've touched on it briefly here and there, but it's really, really hard. How do schools, also parents, both schools and parents, make Tefillah a little more accessible for their children, for their students, to make it in a way that, both their children and their students can really feel like, I'm connecting to Hashem, I'm connecting to God, I'm having a conversation in a real, deep and genuine way.
Yeah.
Especially for those who can't go to Israel for a month in the beginning of the year.
Tefillah is hard. It's hard. It's getting harder. It's getting harder in the world we live in of instant gratification, of instant communication.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you called it a conversation, right, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's unlike any other conversation, right, that I have any place else in my world. I mean, there was once a time where you could have a conversation with somebody by writing a letter to them, right? Even when I was young, right? You would write a letter, and that would take a few days.
Yeah,
right,
that's such a great point.
Right, and a few days for a response to come back.
That's a great mashal. That's great.
Right. So I at least had some concept of a conversation that didn't get an immediate response.
Right. Now, if someone doesn't text you or WhatsApp you back within a couple of minutes, you're like, why are you leaving me on read?
Exactly.
What's going on?
Right.
Totally.
Right.
Wow.
So this isn't a conversation like any other conversation we have anyplace else in our world. I think that perhaps more so than speaking about it as a conversation, thinking about how do we create moments and create value for our kids in the world of disconnecting and being with themselves. Right. And
it's a deep idea.
And helping them to understand that there is value in that there's something we gain or something we lose, right, when we're constantly in conversation with everybody all the time.
Right.
That I'm losing a piece of myself that I don't even have time, right, to discover or be with. And I actually get afraid of it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm almost afraid of being with myself. I'm afraid, like, and challenge your kids. Like, what does it feel like to be without your phone,
Mm-hmm.
For X amount of time, or, Shabbos is an interesting one because we've, obviously some of our kids still very much struggle with being disconnected, and others I think have created a conditioned themselves to doing that, but I don't know that it's necessarily conscious. So sometimes we have to think about think about the experience of Shabbos if you are one who puts their phone away, for all of Shabbos, and how does that feel? And what do we gain by doing that? I remember a couple of years ago, my wife had her class over during the week. I forget even what the occasion was. Oh, you know what? I think it may have been Purim. I think it may have been for Purim Seudah.
Nice.
And we actually were shocked. We're sitting at our dining room table, and these girls come in, and they actually immediately all took their phones and piled them in the middle of the table.
Wow.
And we had never seen anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
And they were conscious of the fact that if they're going to enjoy this experience, they're going to enjoy it more by putting their phones away.
That's awesome.
So I think creating that awareness for our kids, that there is something to be gained with disconnecting, with even for a few minutes a day of being with ourselves, and then being with ourselves leads to being with God.
Yeah.
Right. That's where we're going to begin to find value. I think there's no question that they need role models, right? They need and they're hard to find. They're hard to find because even when we go to shul in the morning, like how many people are really, having a conversation with God when they're there. So finding the people who are really succeeding in that area, who really do feel that, and helping that and having them articulate what that feels like and looks like to our kids, so that they can have role models of that, I think is really critical. And I think that also, validating for our kids that this can be hard, right? That it's not necessarily so easy, but very often in life, the most valuable things, take work. They take effort, and they don't just come, right?
Sure.
So let's think about how we build this incrementally rather than throwing our kids into it. Okay, so now you've got to do this for 45 minutes, straight. Or the worst is when the kids are coming into the first time, like, davening the minyan every day, and and now it's like slichos, right? Slichos on a Monday and a Thursday, right? Right. So let's at least articulate to our kids that we know this is difficult, we know this is challenging, right? But we're gonna push through it. We're gonna find the value in it, right? And we're gonna work at it and keep working at it, right? Until this feels like a place we want to be. Until this feels like something that is adding value to our lives rather than detracting from it.
Totally. And you mentioned that when showing children that when they are with themselves a little bit, then they can be with God. How do they make that connection, or how do you help them make that connection?
Yeah. So I actually find that our kids are, for the most part, are not actually struggling so much with the existence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? Of a God in the world. There was it's a great sociologist named Christian Smith who did this work a number of years ago on looking at youth in America, the religious lives of youth in America. And he coined this term, moralistic therapeutic deism, to describe what most kids in America were experiencing.
Wow.
Right?
What does that even mean?
so it means that they believe there's a God.
Yeah.
They believe that God isn't intimately involved necessarily in the day-to-day, but God wants them to be good, right? He wants them to be good people, right? And being a good person ultimately feels good. Right. It feels good to be good. So it's moralistic and it's theistic, right? And it's therapeutic, right? But it's ultimately deistic. It's almost like, God's there, but he doesn't really care if I put on tefillin this morning or I don't, right? And I think there's a good bit of that in our community, in our community as well, right?
100%.
Right. So I don't know that we need to convince them, that God is there, right? But I think that creating these quiet spaces, right, and allows them the opportunity, right? To say, okay, well, now there's nobody else to talk to, right? So yeah, you can talk to yourself, but you can also talk to God, right? And he's listening, right? He's listening. And and show them the chachma, right? That's what this was designed to do, right?
Showing them that God is involved, right?
For sure, right? And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew, and the Chazal knew that we would need these times, right? So we take the society we live in and we turn it on its head. Meaning, Chazal knew there was going to be a time where we're so wrapped up in the world. Like, this works for Shabbos, right? Think of the brilliance of Shabbos, right? Today in a world where
now
totally now we see it. Oh my goodness. What an amazing concept, right? I know that if I didn't have Shabbos, I would be working 24/7. It's just the reality, right? And now I can't, right? So the same thing comes with davening, right? So we know that there is value to taking a few minutes every day to being unplugged, being untethered, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us that, right? Now let's use that.
But for the kids who are not into that, meaning who are not feeling like, well, exactly like you described, I can't repeat those words, but who feel like God exists, but is not involved in my day to day. So why would they connect to tefillah, or how can we help them then to believe and feel truly, genuinely, in a real way that God is involved, to be able to, that seems like you're saying, make that close the gap in on what tefillah, where tefillah is such an issue. So how do we get them there?
So one of the things that I've tried with kids over the time, for those kids who are struggling, is to encourage them to even articulate their challenges to God, right? Their anger at God, or if nothing more, tell God, you're not involved in my life. I don't see you. Show me. Right, that's a form of tefillah. Right, you're talking to God.
Yeah, totally.
Right? You're talking to God. Right. So whatever it is you might be feeling at this point, right, tell him.
Right, and you've encouraged students to do that for what? Meaning, what's the?
I have told them that I'm thinking of one student in particular, whose life was tough. She was going through a whole bunch of different things at home, and she didn't know if she believed, because looking at my life, it doesn't look like anybody's really guiding this in any particular way, or at least not in any good way,
in a kind way towards me. Right,
exactly. So I said, okay, so just take a few minutes during davening and say that to him, or just say it. Just say it to yourself, right? To some degree, hit palel, right? It's a reflexive, right? It's a reflexive exercise. It's a time to reflect on ourselves. That's why, right? That's why we have Shemona Esrei the way it is. Right? Shemona Esrei is all about our needs, and the Rav writes, right? It's about helping us to reflect on what is important and what isn't important in our lives. What are the things we do need? What are the things we don't need? Or pushing kids to recognize, even if you don't see God in control, right? So at least recognize where you don't have control, right? Where are the areas? What are the things that you can't your health,
right?
At the end of the day, yeah, there are certain things you can do to stay healthy, but we all know, right? There are areas,
especially with what's going on now,
right, that you just can't control.
Sure.
So there's value for you, right, just in terms of retaining your own humility, your own sense of self, to get up and say, you know what, I can't control this. I recognize these are areas of my life I can't control. How smart I'm going to be, I don't know. I don't really have control. I can study for this test, but there are limits. There's certain things that are just out of my control. The stress level I have, right, in my life is just, sometimes things are going to be stressful. I'm not going to, the things that I won't necessarily be able to control. There's value in simply stating and recognizing. We were talking about vulnerability, right? There's value to others, right, when you articulate your vulnerability to them, but there's value to yourself, right? When you allow yourself to be vulnerable. So here's a moment, right, where just allow yourself in your own space to be vulnerable, to articulate those vulnerabilities. Right? That's a form of tefillah, right? And if that becomes something that you can work into your own daily regimen, I think it will soon become something that they associate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Wow, it's amazing. It's very, very insightful. Thank you for sharing. And just to wrap up, are there any books or svarim that you'd recommend for our listeners to broaden their horizon in parenting, Jewish education?
Parenting, there's actually a book that was written probably 10 years ago now, by a guy named Richard Weisbord. It's called The Parents We Mean to Be.
Interesting.
Which is a fantastic book. And in fact, for the educators out there, he goes by Rick Weisbord. He's at the Harvard School of the Graduate School of Education. He's fantastic. Everything he writes is really fantastic.
Okay. Gotta check it out.
And he has they have a project for schools called Making Caring Common, which is also, I think, very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So I would highly advise both parents and educators to take a look at Weisbord's.
Amazing. Okay. Well, thank you so much for so much wisdom and giving over so much to parents, to educators that really, I mean, for myself, I found this to be extremely insightful and an amazing conversation. And I know for our listeners will be as well. So thank you so much for taking the time out today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.